Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Thank you. I just really felt like a lamb being led to the slaughter waiting there, you know. But my name is Michael, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm very happy to be here. And yesterday when I arrived at the airport, something unbelievable happened. When I went through to immigration, I was the very, very first one. All of the agents were standing gossiping, and they scurried back to their place, and I went forward. And so I was interrogated at great length by this extraordinarily handsome young man about what I was doing yet again in America, and why I come to America. And I've learned the hard way that it isn't sufficient to say that you like America to come here. I've been told that was so I was quite honest, and I said, I'm going to Santa Monica. And he said, have you been there before? I said, no, but as you know, I've been in LA before. And he had interrogated me about my work, which stopped many, many years ago. So he knew I was retired, and I had retired from engineering. And so he said, well, what brings you there? And I said, well, I'm attending a convention. And he said, the convention is to do with engineering, trying to catch me out. And I said, no, it isn't. And he said, well, what convention is it? I said, well, since you asked, sir, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. And so he looked at me for a while, stamped my passport, and said, you can go. So here I am, but it was sort of funny to break one's anonymity, if you can call it that, in actual fact. But I'm very, very proud to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Isn't it extraordinary? The very word which brought so much shame to me is the one which brings me great pride now. And I've always loved the fellowship, right from the very, very first moment. I went to my first meeting, and I remember it so well. I went into the centre of London. I live in Chiswick, which is a lovely place just outside. Well, it isn't, it's part of Greater London. And I went there so that I wouldn't meet anybody I knew locally. And they said, oh, we'll send someone round, but I thought a van would come down Netheravon Road with AA on the side, all that sort of madness. And I remember distinctly going up the steps into the building and thinking of my father, who was long dead. And when in one of the many lectures he gave me, I was a very wayward teenager. He said, I don't know what's going to happen to you, Michael. He said, I think you're going to end up on the end of a rope. So I thought about him, and I thought, well, Dad, here I am. It's much worse than the end of a rope. And I went into this meeting, and I thought it was the best thing I ever did. It was so amazing, because no one interrogated me, no one paid any attention to me at all, and they were all fighting among themselves, and they were fighting with this woman, this fairly young woman, who was telling them about her cat. Her cat had cancer, and she wanted to take her cancerous cat to the Bristol Homeopathic Cancer Treatment Centre, which was for human beings. And they wouldn't accept the cat there. And she obviously was dragging this story around London and driving all the meetings mad. And she said that they said that the cat must understand what they're saying. She said, but my cat does understand. And I know what my cat is saying, and I can tell you what my cat is saying. I thought, this is the best place ever. They're all completely... So then towards the end of the meeting, one woman turned to her and said, you know what you should do with your cat is take it on to the laying on of hands, which takes place in Westminster Cathedral, as distinct from Westminster Abbey. And that just about finished me off. So at the end of the meeting, I went over to this woman and I said, you know, I'm very fond of animals. I think I prefer animals than human beings, you know, really. I try to treat people like I treat dogs, and it doesn't work that way, you know. Sit, come, all of that, no. And so I said, you know, cats are very territorial, and if you know, just love your cat, keep your cat in the place that it knows, and just make a wise decision. And a little old lady who was pulling on a fag said to me that a fag in England is a cigarette, incidentally. And she said, I haven't seen you at this meeting before. I said, of course you haven't seen me at this meeting before. I haven't been at it before. And she said, and what meetings do you go to? And I said, I've never been to a meeting. And she said, you're a newcomer. I said, yes. And there was a sharp intake of breath. Oh, you're a newcomer, they all discovered. And one man who was very gobby, he turned and he said, why didn't you say you were a newcomer? We asked for it at the beginning of the meeting. I said, I heard it at the beginning of the meeting, but I didn't know what a newcomer was. That's why. That's why I didn't respond. I said, and incidentally, I don't like your attitude, I don't like the way you're addressing me, and I don't like the way you've been talking to that woman with the cat. So he said, woo, 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 you know, I'm sorry, I apologize. I said, that's better. So I had arrived, and I thought that all meetings were going to be like that. In many respects, it echoes it, but it was been downhill ever since, I must say. But I've always really loved the fellowship from that moment forward. Incidentally, the little old lady, her name was Kay. Unbelievably, she lived near me in Chiswick, and she was with another woman called Jean. And I had clocked a pub outside which was called the Cock and Pheasant, and that's where I was going to go after the meeting to have a drink. And they wouldn't go away. They kept with me. I thought, Christ, what's going on here? And by this time we were in Oxford Circus, and I was drunk, but not drunk in my sort of term that I was falling over. But they wouldn't go away, and I thought, I'll have to get rid of them. I'm beginning to shake. And I started to shake, and shaking in front of other people, I don't recommend it. It's very, very nasty. It just gets worse and worse. And they were holding on to me. And I thought, I'll have to get rid of them, and I'll get back to the pub. And then the shakes got so much, I knew I wouldn't be served in the pub in that condition. I've been there before. So then I thought, I'll have to go to an off-license, that's a liquor store. And then I thought, I'll have to go to a hotel. But somehow or other, we ended up in a taxi, and we got back to Chiswick. And I was told to just remain quiet for the afternoon and drink some tea, which I did, and promptly threw it all up. And then I went to a meeting in the evening. So that's how everything started for me. And I really loved the fellowship. Things I didn't want. One was a sponsor. I didn't want one of those. The other one was doing anything to do with the steps. Didn't want that at all. Spiritual awakening, I thought was a very good idea. You just had to sit around the place and wait for it to happen. So that was going to be the easiest part of it. But and I knocked around with two wonderful friends who we really were demonic, but we had a great sense of humour, and we used to do what we later learned was taking everybody's inventory, but we didn't know that expression. And have a right good giggle about, and one of them was a mimic, and we used to extend all the meetings. I had such fun with those guys. I'm eternally grateful to their bad company. But you know, after a while we realized that we shouldn't really be talking and gossiping about people at the meeting. So what we used to do was say, we'll come off the program for 2 minutes and talk about them, and then we go back onto the program. We did that very successfully. But something big happened. We stopped doing it completely. In other words, the effect of going to meetings, sticking together, something was happening. It's happened because of the 2 minutes. It happened because we stopped. And I got this feeling about the power, if you want to use that word, of actually going to meetings without any effort on my part. The reason I didn't want to sponsor was they were killjoys, and just everything about them. There were bullies, and they disapproved of sex, for sure. And the three of us used to say largely because they weren't having any themselves. But then they did the dirt, and they went and got sponsors, and I thought, damn them. So I had to go and get a sponsor. So I asked this young man at my meeting. He was blonde, much younger than me, and he lived locally. That was important. He was married, and his wife was expecting a baby. That was evidence of fairly recent sexual activity. So perfect. And I thought he was going to interrogate me, and I was all prepared for the question, are you willing to go to an Yes. But he said nothing. He said, fine. Then I discovered that he was the wrong sponsor for me, because I knew what sponsors did. They used to tell you something, and you went to a meeting and you repeated it, prefaced by those 3 words, those important 3 words, my sponsor says. Well, he said nothing. He used to say, how do you feel? How do you think the other person feels? What options have you got? When you say you're feeling frightened, what do you actually mean by that? When you say you hate the other person, what do you mean by that? So he was completely wrong. But I couldn't dump him because I'd gone around all of London saying, I've got a sponsor now, but he's the best sponsor. So I couldn't let myself down and say I had to get rid of him. So he was the wrong sponsor for 22 years. And during that period, I learned very little about him, but an awful lot about myself. Everything about myself. I start with the good. Everything that was good. Everything which was bad. Everything I didn't want to talk about. I learned all of that about myself. And also something which was wonderful. I learned about my own talents and how to respect them and how to develop them and actually how to go and find new talents and develop them and to take an interest in what I did with my downtime and the great amount of interest which I had in life, and I'm eternally grateful to him. So I prospered quite a lot, but was always happy to be in the fellowship. I prospered in my job quite a lot. And then, after 22 years, something disastrous happened, and it happened in America, and that is I relapsed. And I relapsed just like that. It was an ordinary day. I had done my rituals in the morning, which I've done this morning here. And I always thought if I was going to relapse, because of the quality of my recovery, something big would happen and intervene, and it didn't. I'd been to meetings in the morning, I'd telephoned people, I just went. And I thought, okay, in for a penny, in for a pound. I'm having such a good time with these rather glamorous people. I go back in whenever I want to. No, didn't work that way. The day chose me when I came back in. I wasn't young when that happened. I was age 65, I was retired, had this perfect life. And I came back in, I was nearly 70. And the reason I came back in was not to end up standing here today, and I want to thank everybody who's organized this and for inviting me, was really to die with dignity. I was really a write-off. I was very, very thin. I weighed 12 stone. That's about 125 pounds. I had black lines under my eyes. I was a complete wreck. I had been a recluse for 3 years. My poor head had gone long, long, long ago. But I just didn't want to be found like that. I knew I was better than it. I knew I had been better. And I just wanted dignity in death. Well, it was 8.5 years ago, and here I am. And it says an awful lot about the fellowship that I come back. But I wasn't always welcomed with open arms when I came back. When I shared what happened, people said, what happened to you, Michael? You, above all people. When I told them, they said, that's inappropriate sharing. You can't do that. And I listened to them, and I believed it. And so I said things in a different way, and I began to please people, but I desperately wanted my own misery to end. So there was a line in the big book, which I remember was one of the reasons that brought me back, where it says, "We will know loneliness as few do." And at the worst stage of that relapse, I wasn't reading the big book, that came to me when I was trying to get in touch with who I had been, that lovely spiritual man that I had been. And I thought, my God, I always thought that loneliness was to do with people. This is loneliness of the inner self. And I had absolutely, completely destroyed it. But after about 18 months, when I was back in, and people were saying, "Oh, he's back, Michael, he's doing wonderful," I began to get that loneliness again. And I thought, no, I'm not going to let this happen to me. So I just said what had actually happened to me, and that is at the age of 65, with 22 years of recovery in the fellowship, I picked up drugs for the very first time in my life. And I did it here in this city, in Beverly Hills. And I snorted cocaine at a party. I had never, ever touched it, and instantly I wanted more. Instantly I was out of control. My alcoholic temperament had just been there waiting for all of this to happen, and I didn't know a thing about it. And I thought it was so glamorous, I thought the feeling was so wonderful, that was how I was going to spend the rest of my life. I felt I'd always been a rather silly Irish man who didn't indulge in such stuff as smoking that stuff and all of that. But I did have a good time. I know you're meant to say it was all horrible. It wasn't. Part of it was very, very good, but I did end up in that pitiful condition which I told you. But it just wasn't cocaine. I became a crackhead very quickly. I was on heroin. I was on ketamine. I was on sleeping pills. And I was also on downers, and all of that, every day. Not just occasionally. Every single day I was toxic. So that is what I learned about it, and I raged against the fellowship that no one ever told me about drugs. No one told me or even spoke about it, that they were seductive and that they were part of my character that I should have been aware of. But I speak about it quite loudly now, and it is my experience in particular for young people. And talking about young people, I'm 78 now. I'm doing well, aren't I, really? Thanks to the fellowship, thanks to people like you. What I am, the reason why I am so involved with the WAAFT movement is for young people, and the not so young, who are coming into the fellowship. They go online, I'm as old as the fellowship. Everything has changed. Everything changed 15 years ago. Everything in 2 years' time is going to be different. And they source it out. And they come across the words which we use so proudly in our publicity, the Serenity Prayer. And step 6 and step 7 in particular, which says, humbly asked him with a capital H. And it's, this does frighten people. I don't want them to walk away. I want the people to come through the door to go and find out what it's all about. And what Tim was saying this morning is absolutely right. The magic is actually sitting beside each other on those cheap poly chairs in so many church halls throughout the world, and that is the way it must continue. But the power of the internet mustn't be ignored. We have to accept it. Look at all the wars that are taking place. Look how all the people group themselves together into armies through the interweb. So it is our responsibility for the future. I hope that since this is the first one, and I really, to Dorothy and Pamela and everybody associated with it, I'm eternally grateful that this has happened. And I have my friend sitting here, Pat. We're of the same age. I hope he won't mind me saying that he's nearly that age. But we have said to each other, we never thought we would see this in our own lifetime. So let's hope it's going to develop for the few years that we have left, and for all of you who are so much younger, I think. But thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you again for asking me.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.